sitting in the cockpit of a Norwegian built 8-meter, built in 1948. And this boat's had an awful lot of use, and we've been stripping all the brightwork on the boat, and we've been stripped the cockpit combings here. This part's already been done, and some on the port side here. And I've got a little corner here that I can demonstrate how it's done with, and we're actually going to push it off there. We're using a heat gun and a putty knife now. That putty knife right there is the one I'm going to use. And it's a little different than most. I've squared the end of the putty knife right off nice and square. And the reason for that is so there won't be anything sharp on the edges or anything like that I could dig into the woodwork with here. Well, here are the two tools that we're going to use, the heat gun and the putty knife. And there's a few things about the heat gun. It doesn't do you much good if you get in close and start getting bubbles and then coming out and coming in and not being able to control the heat. So you kind of have to discipline yourself to stay in at one distance, some kind of an optimum distance. It'll be something like that. And you heat a very small area. And when you see it bubbling, you can bubble it quite a bit because the heat gun will not scorch the wood in any way. It's not quite hot enough to do that, but it's hot enough to melt the varnish. Heat rises up, so it's already being softened in front of me as I go uphill. So I start at the bottom and I wait for the bubbles to appear, and then as I scrape that, the bubbles are appearing in front of me as I go uphill, and it's kind of like mowing the lawn. If I were to start at the top, what would happen would be I'd get that bubbled and scrape that off, but when I move down, that wouldn't be preheated because the heat rises. So it's much, much easier if you start heating at the bottom and work your way uphill with a heat gun than it is to work your way down. Totally different product, man. That's like I don't know what it is. All right, after we push this varnish off with the putty knife and heat gun, there's been some residual varnish left on there that I can't get with that dull putty knife. So what I'm gonna do is switch over to a system of scraping it, and I'll show you what I'm gonna use. These right here are number 5 plane blades. They're sharpened quite nicely. This one's very straight. This one's got a little bit of a curvature to it. It's very much like using a cabinet scraper. I don't like using a scraper that lays flat with a right angle blade. I like to stand the thing up in this manner so it's 90 degrees to the surface and pull it like this. Or push it like that. Preferably you push rather than pull. You last a lot longer pushing than you do pulling. They've put another type of product on here, and the heat gun didn't seem to affect it at all. So what we're going to do is we're going to try a little paint remover on it, and I think it'll work well, and if it doesn't, we're just going to sand it off. Well, whatever this other product here is that's in the corner, I can't really identify it, but I've got to find a way to get rid of it, so I decided I would just pick up a plane blade like this and just very aggressively just scrape it right off, and I've done it right in here and it's worked out pretty well for me, so I'm going to just show you how I can get rid of the rest of it here. We just finished using the heat gun and the putty knife to strip off the varnish in this area. Now we're going to switch over to sanding. All right, we're starting off sanding here with 60 grit sandpaper, and we've got it wrapped around a rubber block. I'm going to work at it with this paper for a while until the color starts looking just about right. What I'm doing here with this rubber block is I'm squeezing it in my hands and creating a curvature to this surface. It actually makes it maintain a straightness across the block in this direction and a curvature in this direction, so that as I apply it to the wood, I'm going to get a nice straight grade across it like this, because this actually grades the material. And I'm sanding with the grain only here, and I'm actually rocking it as I go along like this so I can use a different area in the sandpaper as I go across. Now the color's starting to come up really nice, and I'm going to feel it, and it's graded very nice and flat. I've got a little bit more work to do around here, and maybe this stain here and in here, a couple little spots over in here, a couple of stains up here, so I've got to work at it a little bit more, but it's the same thing. Basically, I've stopped right here because it's nice and flat now. I've removed most of the stains that were around the plugs and different things, and I haven't locally sanded it very hard around the plugs because I'd get a dip in it like that. I've grade sanded it nice and flat, and it's time to stop because the color's looking very good, and what I'm going to do now is go down in a weight paper down to 100 weight. And that will sand out quite a bit of the scratching that the heavier paper leaves in there. I'd like to show you the comparison here between this piece and this piece over here. Now both of these pieces have been stripped of their varnish. There's a little bit more work to do in the corner. This one's been sanded out with number 60 weight paper and 100 weight paper, and this piece hasn't been sanded at all. This piece used to look just like that. It had the same amount of stains and problems around the plugs and different things, and the same amount of discoloration, and now it looks like this. Now it's a very, very nice quality African mahogany. So underneath those stains and problems, this is what you have. And before we apply varnish in our next video, we're going to do a little bit of grain raising by applying a little bit of water, and that'll raise the grain up, and then we're going to go down in one weight of paper, probably down to 120, and give it another light sanding before we start applying stain and sealer and varnish.